Lane Frost's father shook his head in disappointment. "Son, you're too clumsy for bulls. Find something safer," he said firmly. The 15-year-old cowboy clenched his fists, walked to his room, and made a promise that would change everything. What he did 15 years later left his father speechless. Subscribe and comment what state you're watching from. Have you ever had to prove someone wrong about your dreams? Let's dive into this incredible true story. The summer of 1978 started like any other in Oklahoma, with the smell of hay and the distant sound of cattle. But for 15-year-old Lane Frost, it would be the summer that changed everything. He stood in the dusty corral behind their modest ranch house, watching his father Clyde fix a broken gate. The older man's calloused hands worked methodically, the same hands that had once been legendary in local rodeo circuits. "Dad, I've been thinking," Lane said, his voice barely audible over the creaking metal. "Maybe I could start practicing on some of the calves, work my way up to—" "Lane, stop." Clyde didn't even look up from his work. "We've talked about this. You're too clumsy for bulls. Hell, you can barely stay on a gentle horse without finding trouble." The words hit harder than any bull ever could. Lane had heard variations of this speech before, but today felt different. Maybe it was the way his father's voice carried that tone of finality. Or maybe it was seeing the old rodeo trophies gathering dust on their mantle, reminders of dreams that belonged to someone else's past. "But Dad, you were—" "I was different," Clyde interrupted, finally turning to face his son. "I had natural balance, instinct. You're book smart, son. Use that brain for something that won't get you killed." That evening, Lane sat on the edge of his bed, staring at a crumpled poster of legendary bull rider Don Gay. The poster had been hidden under his mattress for months, studied like a sacred text. Every line on Gay's face told a story of grit and determination, qualities Lane was certain he possessed even if nobody else could see them. 3 miles down the road, old Pete Hendricks ran a small training facility where young cowboys came to learn the basics. Pete had been watching Lane for weeks, noticing how the kid lingered by the fence during practice sessions, how his eyes tracked every movement of rider and bull with an intensity that couldn't be taught. "You're Clyde's boy, aren't you?" Pete called out one evening as Lane walked past the arena. Lane stopped, his heart racing. "Yes, sir." "Heard you've been wanting to try your hand at riding." Pete's weathered face showed no emotion. "Your daddy know you're here? He thinks I'm at the library." Pete chuckled, a dry sound like wind through wheat. "Library, huh? Well, I reckon there's different kinds of education. You willing to learn the hard way?" "Yes, sir." "Then be here tomorrow at dawn." "And kid?" Pete's voice turned serious. "This ain't about proving nothing to nobody. It's about proving something to yourself. You understand that difference?" Lane nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. All he knew was that something deep inside him burned every time he saw a rider and bull locked in their 8-second dance. It wasn't just the thrill he craved. It was the purity of it, the moment where everything else disappeared except man, beast, and will. That night, as his parents slept, Lane sat by his window looking out at the starlit pasture. Somewhere out there, in arenas across the country, cowboys were climbing onto the backs of animals that could break them in half. Some would succeed, others would fail, but all of them would face that moment of truth when the gate swung open and time slowed to a crawl. His father's words echoed in his mind. Too clumsy for bulls. Maybe Clyde was right. Maybe Lane didn't have the natural gifts that made champions. But as he watched the stars wheel overhead, he made himself a promise that would echo through the next 15 years of his life. He would find a way to make those 8 seconds count, no matter how many times he had to pick himself up from the dirt. The boy who went to sleep that night was different from the one who would wake up at dawn to begin his secret education. Some transformations happen gradually, over years of small choices and quiet determination. Others begin with a single moment of decision, when a person decides that other people's limitations don't have to become their own reality. Dawn came cold and unforgiving, just like Pete Hendricks had promised. Lane arrived at the training facility with his stomach twisted in knots, wearing his father's old boots that were still too big for his feet. The arena looked different in the early morning light, smaller somehow, but also more intimidating. "First lesson," Pete said, not bothering with pleasantries. is learning how to fall. Most folks think riding is about staying on. Smart folks know it's about getting off in one piece. For the next 3 hours, Lane practiced falling off a mechanical bull that moved like it had a personal grudge against him. His shoulders ached, his ribs felt bruised, and his pride was somewhere in the dirt. But every time Pete asked if he'd had enough, Lane hauled himself up and climbed back on. "Your daddy ever tell you about his last ride?" Pete asked during a water break. Lane shook his head, grateful for the chance to catch his breath. 1968 state championships. He was leading the competition, needed one good score to take home the title. Pete's eyes grew distant. "Drew a bull named Tornado Alley, meanest piece of horn and muscle this side of Texas. Your daddy made it 6 seconds before that bull sent him flying into the fence. Broke 3 ribs in his collarbone." He never told me that story. Probably because that's when he decided the risk wasn't worth it anymore. Had a family to think about, responsibilities. Pete studied Lane carefully. Question is, what are you willing to risk for 8 seconds? The weeks turned into months, and Lane's secret education continued. He learned to read a bull's body language, to anticipate the explosive power that would try to separate him from the rigging. More importantly, he learned about the mental game, how to quiet the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like his father's doubts. At school, his grades began to slip, not because he couldn't focus, but because his mind was constantly replaying rides, analyzing what went wrong and what went right. His classmates talked about college applications and career plans, while Lane counted down the hours until he could return to Pete's arena. "You're getting better," Pete admitted one afternoon after Lane managed to stay on a particularly ornery practice bull for the full 8 seconds. "But better ain't good enough for the real thing. Out there, it's not just about technique, it's about heart. And heart is something you either have or you don't." "How do you know if you have it?" Pete pointed toward the main arena, where a sign advertised an upcoming amateur competition. "You enter that, and you'll find out real quick." That evening, Lane stared at the entry form until the words blurred together. The competition was in 3 weeks. His first real test against bulls and riders he'd never faced before. But entering meant risking exposure, meant the possibility that his father would discover his secret training and put an end to everything. He thought about Don Gay's poster still hidden under his mattress, and about the promise he'd made to himself under the stars. Some dreams were worth the risk of disappointment. Some dreams were worth the risk of everything. The next morning, Lane mailed the entry form with hands that barely shook. Pete watched him do it with the kind of quiet pride that old cowboys reserve for moments when they see something special taking shape. "Your daddy's going to find out eventually," Pete warned. "I know. He's going to be madder than a hornet in a rainstorm." "I know that too." Pete nodded slowly. "Then I reckon we better make sure you're ready to show him something worth being mad about." 3 weeks later, Lane would climb onto his first real bull in competition. He would discover that all the practice in the world couldn't prepare him for the moment when the gate swung open and a ton of angry beef tried to rearrange his bones. But he would also discover something else, that his father's definition of too clumsy and reality were two very different things. The boy was becoming a cowboy, one bruise and one small victory at a time. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a 15-year-old's promise was growing into something that would define the next decade and a half of his life. 15 years later, Lane Frost stood in the back lot of the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas, polishing a gold championship buckle that caught the arena lights like captured lightning. The journey from that awkward 15-year-old to the man holding bull riding's most coveted prize had been written in 8-second chapters, each one a testament to the power of proving doubters wrong, especially when that doubter lived under your own roof. The crowd inside was already roaring, but Lane's mind drifted to a small arena in Oklahoma, where an old man had taught him that falling was just another way of learning to get back up. Pete Hendricks had been gone for 3 years now, but his lessons lived on in every ride, every recovery, every moment when Lane chose courage over caution. "You ready for this?" asked Tough Hedeman, adjusting his own gear nearby. Lane nodded, though his stomach carried the familiar flutter of pre-ride nerves. Tonight wasn't just about defending his title. It was about facing Red Rock, the bull that had become his greatest nemesis and, paradoxically, his path to greatness. 7 times they had met in the arena. 7 times Red Rock had won. Tonight would be different. As he walked toward the chutes, Lane spotted a familiar figure in the stands. Clyde Frost sat in the 3rd row, his weathered hands gripping his hat. The old man's journey from skeptic to supporter had been almost as remarkable as his son's rise to championship status. The day Lane had come home with his first professional victory, Clyde had stared at the prize money and small trophy for a long moment before finally saying, "I reckon I was wrong about the clumsy part." "Riders, this is it," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Championship round, and Lane Frost has drawn the bull that's been his white whale, Red Rock." The crowd erupted as Lane climbed up on the chute rails. Below him, Red Rock snorted and shifted, 1,500 pounds of muscle and attitude that had sent dozens of cowboys to the emergency room. But Lane had studied this bull like a scholar studies ancient texts, learning every tell, every movement pattern, every second of their previous encounters. "Remember what we talked about," his mentor whispered. "It's not about the bull. It's about those 8 seconds belonging to you." Lane lowered himself onto Red Rock's back, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that had carried him through hundreds of rides. The rigging felt right in his hands, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. In the stands, his father leaned forward, and Lane could almost see the reflection of his own nervous energy in the old man's eyes. The gate swung open and Red Rock exploded into the arena like a force of nature. But this time, something was different. Lane wasn't just riding, he was flowing, moving with the bull's fury instead of fighting against it. Every twist, every bone-jarring leap became part of a dance that had taken 15 years to choreograph. 6 seconds, 7 seconds. The crowd was on its feet, sensing something special unfolding. 8 seconds. The horn sounded, and Lane dismounted clean, landing on his feet as Red Rock continued his rampage around the arena. The score came quickly. 96 points, a personal best, and enough to secure the championship. But as Lane raised his arms to acknowledge the crowd's roar, his eyes found his father in the stands. Clyde Frost was crying. Not the tears of disappointment he'd once feared his son would bring him, but tears of pure pride. The man who had once declared his son too clumsy for bulls was now watching that same son become legend. Later, in the quiet of the competitors' area, Lane found his father waiting. The old cowboy held something in his hands, a small, worn piece of metal. "This was my first buckle," Clyde said quietly. "Won it the year before you were born. Always figured it would gather dust on a shelf, but..." He placed it in Lane's hands. "I reckon it belongs with a real champion." Lane looked down at the tarnished silver, then back at his father. "Dad, about what you said when I was 15. "Son," Clyde interrupted, "sometimes the best thing a father can do is be wrong about his kid's limitations. You took my doubt and made it into something beautiful." They stood there in comfortable silence, father and son, connected by more than blood now. Connected by the understanding that some dreams are worth pursuing precisely because others think they're impossible. The 15-year-old boy's promise had become a man's legacy, and the buckle in Lane's hands was just the beginning of a story that would inspire cowboys for generations to come.